512 horsepower versus 542? Do you want a 5.3 liter with this, and this making 512 horsepower? Or one with this, and this making 542?
Hello everybody, I'm Richard Holdner, and as always, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to ask the very important question, which one would you rather have? An all-motor 5.3 liter that makes 542 horsepower, or an all-motor 5.3 liter that makes 511 horsepower? I know what you're thinking. Richard, why wouldn't I want the one that makes more power? Well, there's a twist. The one that makes less power makes more torque. Now, which one would you pick? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's compare them and let me know at the end which one would you pick. Okay, to find out whether you would want maybe a 511 horsepower 5.3 or a 541 or 2 horsepower. I mean, it seems obvious on the surface, but actually the reason I'm doing this video because it's actually not obvious, and it illustrates a very important thing, and that's that the average power production is usually way more important than the peak numbers that we see, which is why I always try to include graphs in all these tests so you can see, hey, look, this one is way better for 99% of the curve, and so 99% of the times it's probably going to win in a race. But let's take a look at our 5.3, and what I'm going to do is show you how we got to each one of these. That way, in addition to showing you the end result, you can also look and go, hey, maybe I just wanted one of these other ones where all you did was put a camshaft in it or an intake manifold or cylinder head or whatever, and you can go, hey, look, I just want that part. I don't need to go all the way to a really expensive, total modification thing. But we started out with this motor was a 5.3 liter. It was all aluminum. It was an L33. I got it from the wrecking yard. I was lucky to score it one day. And not only that was I lucky to find it, because I also found another aluminum motor, but it was not as in good a shape as this L33. And as it turned out, the L33 has just run endless dyno tests and has worked flawlessly the whole time. So it's actually been very, very awesome. But the L33 was originally run in stock trim. So by stock trim, we don't mean that it's in a vehicle or something, and I get these comments all the time, but please continue to leave them. But we don't have, with the way that we run it on the engine dyno is no accessories. We run an open throttle body, so no air intake or mass air meter. We run usually headers. Sometimes I run it with stock exhaust manifolds. We've done that a lot, and then some sort of exhaust back behind there. But in this case, we ran long tube headers and some sort of collector extension. A lot of times I'll run mufflers, and the mufflers that we run with a 3-inch exhaust tubing and then the free flow, like kind of straight through mufflers, they do take a lot of the noise out of it, but they don't affect the power at all, other than them being a length of collector extension, which can have an effect down low, but they don't usually affect the peak power at all. So we run it in that manner, long tube headers and some sort of collector extension, the open throttle body, as I said. We also run it with an optimized tune, which the factory ECU does not provide unless you go in and tune it. That's why when you go and you have a stock vehicle and you take it in and you get a tune on it, they're able to add power, because usually from the factory tune is richer than it needs to be safe, and also has less timing than it could, because they have to make sure that there are lots of guys that are just going to put 87 octane in there, and it needs to be able to run on very, very low quality fuel. But if we put good fuel in it, we ran all of this testing on 91, premium for California. But what we did was set this motor up with larger injectors. Not that we needed them for the stock one, but we would eventually be going up in power, so we just wanted to have enough fuel. And the injectors don't do anything other than give you the opportunity to supply more fuel and to make more power. But run with the long tube headers, the way that we run it on the dyno with an electric water pump, our aluminum L33 produced 364.7 horsepower. Yep. And peak torque checked in at 389.1 foot-pounds of torque, making more torque than horsepower. Pretty common for a truck motor. So now let's take a look and see what happened when we started the modifications, and then we'll be able to compare, the ultimate modification where it made 511 horsepower and go, well, how does that compare to something that makes even more power? Okay, we'll take a look at our stock L33, 365 horsepower, 389 foot-pounds of torque, just basically stock intake, the Trailblazer SS or later version of the intake manifold, 799 head stock camshaft, just long tube headers. Basically, here's what happened after we modified it, so we'll take a look at that. And we're going to take a look. Basically, we kept the stock cylinder heads on it. We did a valve spring upgrade, and then we replaced the camshaft and the intake manifold. We install a fast LSXR intake manifold and a 102mm throttle body, and then a Brian Tooley Racing Red Hot cam. I'll go ahead and put the specs up here, but it's actually, as things go, fairly mild camshaft. Camshaft was a 617, 619 lift split, a 221, 240 something degree exhaust duration, 113 degree lobe separation angle. As I said, the combination of the intake manifold and camshaft picked up power quite a bit. We were up at 481 horsepower, 480.7. and 416.7 foot-pounds torque. Started gaining power from about 4,000 on out. But here's what happened when we did our ultimate thing. So we were getting so close to 500 horsepower. I decided, hey, look, we got to make 500 horsepower with this combination. And here's how we did it. What we did was upgrade both the intake manifold slightly, and then, but definitely the cylinder head. So we retained the hot rod cam, or the red hot camshaft, and we replaced the cylinder heads. We removed the 799 heads and then replaced them with a set of TrickFlow 220 as-cast heads, but they actually weren't as-cast. Guys from Brian Tooley did a number of things to them. First, they milled them 30 thousandths so we could bring the compression up. And then they also did hand porting and blending because, you know, Brian used to own Total Engine Airflow. He knows a thing or two about porting these heads. So improve them even further. So we're talking about heads that can easily support more than 600 horsepower. So the combination, and then a port-matched fast intake manifold to those cylinder heads. Personally, in the testing that I've done, I've yet to see a port match intake make lots and lots of power or change the power dramatically, but this was done, and so it deserves mentioning. So we ran this combination, and our power jumped up a good bit over 500, 511.8, so we'll call it 512 horsepower. Peak torque was up to 440 foot-pounds of torque. So real impressive on the torque production on this modified combination. In fact, you take a look at this torque plateau from 47 or 4800, we're talking 434, all the way out to, you know, 59 or 5800, where it's 437 foot-pounds. So, you know, I like to call this a torque plateau for the LS. So when you get it right, you see a torque plateau, and this one is right. We can see that our torque plateau is even like an upward trend torque plateau. So it's good. And then it starts to fall off as we come to expect. But a good combination. This thing, like I said, 511.8 horsepower, so we could round up to 512. So that's that combination. Now let's take a look at our other combination that made 541 horsepower. And before you think, hey, maybe more power is better, let's take a look. Okay, here's where things start getting interesting, and we can do our comparison. This is obviously our stock power curve again, 365 horsepower, 389 foot-pounds. And here is our heavily modified version. You can see it makes a lot of power. So it's all the way up at 541.8 horsepower. So near 542 horsepower. Peak torque is at 404 foot-pounds of torque. So compared to our stock one, this one is better from essentially 5,000 on up, which kind of tells you something about its high RPM nature. And the way that we were able to do this, we still had our TrickFlow as-cast, no longer as-cast, milled and ported cylinder heads. We installed a much bigger camshaft in this combination and also changed the intake manifold. So the camshaft was Brian Tooley Racing. It was the Stage 4 LS3 cam, I believe. It was 636 lift. It was a 233, 250X duration and 113 degree lobe separation angle. So pretty good bit bigger than the Red Hot cam. We also installed the Brian Tooley Racing TRINITY intake manifold. So again, very short runner, designed for high RPM operation, 102mm throttle body, same H and 7/8 headers, all of that stuff was the same 80-pound injectors, and we still had our Holly controlling everything. So we did the tuning. I just adjusted it until it made the best power. So we played with air fuel, played with timing, tried it richer, tried it leaner, did all of that stuff. So then this is the best power curve that we were able to produce. So again, over 540 horsepower, near 542 horsepower, 403 foot-pounds of torque. But let's get rid of our stock one. And now it's time for you guys to decide which one of these things you would rather have. That thing makes a lot of power. It revs out pretty good. It made peak power at 7,600, still the same at 7,700. And had we continued to run this, we were at the power peak. It would have started falling over, but probably not dramatically. This thing is kind of a legit 8,000 RPM deal. If you want to continue to rev your Junkyard 5.3L-33 out there at 8,000 RPM. Let me know how that works out. This thing had good springs. It had the Brian Tooley Racing Extreme RPM spring on it, so they were set up with the right coil bind and install height and all that stuff so that we could get the thing to rev. This has stock rockers on it. It did have aftermarket push rods on it, but stock rockers that came with a high mileage motor. No rocker studs or anything, no shaft rocker, none of that stuff, just basically stock bolt down rockers. But here is a comparison between the 541.8 horsepower version and our 511 horsepower version. So you can see the 511 horsepower, they cross over at 6,800. So from 6,800 on up, the higher RPM, more powerful version, the 541 horsepower version, makes more power. From 6,800 RPM and down, the lower horsepower version, the 511 horsepower version, makes more power, and not just a little more power. So we look at, for instance, let's look at the torque curve. So the peak torque is 403 foot-pounds for the high horsepower version, but 440 foot-pounds for the lower horsepower version. So in terms of torque production, in terms of peak torque production, a lot more for the lower horsepower version. And it's not just there. So if we pick a point down here in the RPM range where we see significant difference, here at 4,700, we have 374 foot-pounds for the high horsepower version, 374 versus 432 foot-pounds. So that's a big change in torque. You're talking a difference of 58 foot-pounds of torque there. So it's a dramatic amount. And you can see all the way down the longer runner, fast intake manifold and milder camshaft, and it had the good heads and it had the compression and everything. That combination just made a lot more average power all the way up, like I said, to 6,800. So the question is, and this is the reason that we did this comparison, which one would you choose? Let me know in the comments, which one of these combinations would you rather have? Would you rather have the big peak number? Is that what you're all about? Are you going to gear this thing so that it runs from 6,000 to 8,000 or from 6,500 to 8,000 so we can take advantage of all that glorious high RPM horsepower? Or are you looking for something that's sub 7,000 RPM and have all of the glorious torque that we get from the longer runner version, basically, and the smaller camshaft? Let me know in the comments which one you would rather pick. Armature holder, please make sure, like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. More testing and comparisons coming up.